The first sign that my propane smoker was about to become a federal case was the sound of a car crunching through 6 inches of fresh snow at 7:42 in the morning, during an actual blizzard watch, so somebody could take a photo of my backyard fence. I know it was 7:42 because that's the timestamp on my own security camera, the one that would later save my bacon pun fully intended, because there was a 12-pound brisket on that smoker, and I was not about to let anyone or anything ruin it. My name's Dennis Ellis. I've lived in Maple Ridge Estates for 6 years, in a nice little cul-de-sac house with a fenced backyard, a 2-car garage, and until this whole mess started, a pretty peaceful relationship with my neighbors. The only thorn in that peace was Sheila Bishop, president of the Maple Ridge HOA board, a woman who treated the community bylaws like they were the 10 Commandments, and she was the only one who got to talk to God. Sheila's about 5'4" of pure, concentrated authority complex, always in some quilted vest with the HOA logo stitched on it like she's part of a very uptight motorcycle gang. She's the kind of woman who measures your grass with an actual ruler, and once gave a guy a citation because his inflatable Halloween pumpkin was structurally excessive. So when the National Weather Service put out a blizzard watch for our county, 18 to 24 inches expected, winds gusting to 40 miles an hour, the whole works, I did what any sensible man does before a blizzard. I stocked up on firewood, checked my generator, and fired up my propane smoker to get a brisket done before the power possibly went out. I want to be clear about something right away, because it matters a lot to how this story goes. Propane smokers are legal. They're safe when used properly. Mine was sitting on a concrete pad, 10 feet from my house, under a little metal awning I'd built specifically so I could smoke meat in bad weather. I've used that thing in rain, in 90-degree heat, and yes, in snow. I've never once had a problem. I got the fire going around 6 that morning, wrapped my brisket, set my temperature probe, and went inside to make coffee and watch the snow start piling up outside my kitchen window. It was peaceful. Beautiful even, in that quiet way a blizzard is beautiful right before it becomes a nightmare. That peace lasted about 90 minutes. At 7:42, I heard a car door. I looked out and there was Sheila Bishop, in her giant SUV with the HOA parking permit hanging from the mirror, standing at the end of my driveway in snow boots and a puffy coat, holding her phone up like she was filming a nature documentary. She was photographing the smoke curling up from my backyard over the fence line. I opened my front door, still in my socks, and called out, "Sheila, can I help you with something?" She turned around slow, like she'd been caught doing something important. "Dennis, I'm documenting a violation." "A violation of what exactly?" "My right to eat brisket." "Open burning during a declared weather emergency," she said, like she was reading it off a plaque somewhere. "It's extremely reckless. It's a sealed propane smoker on a concrete pad under a metal awning. It's not open burning. It's not even close to open burning." She lowered her phone just enough to give me a look, the kind of look that says she's already decided the outcome of this conversation regardless of anything I say. The HOA safety bylaws prohibit combustion appliances during active weather advisories. I don't make the rules, Dennis. I enforce them. "There's no such bylaw," I said, because I actually knew the bylaws pretty well, having read through that binder more times than I'd like to admit after 6 years of run-ins with this woman. "Show me where it says that." "I'll be sending you an official notice," she said, already turning to leave, tucking her phone into her coat like she'd just captured Bigfoot on camera. "You'll want to review Section 14. And then she got in her SUV and drove off through the snow, leaving tire tracks all the way down my quiet little cul-de-sac, off to terrorize whoever else dared to exist that morning. I went back inside, checked on my brisket, still smoking away happily, temperature holding steady, and poured myself another cup of coffee, half amused and half annoyed. I figured this was just Sheila being Sheila. A little power trip, a little photo session, maybe a strongly worded email that I'd ignore like I ignored the one about my mailbox post being an inch outside approved height parameters. I had no idea this was about to become the most ridiculous fight of my entire life. The notice showed up 2 days later, once the blizzard had actually hit and dumped nearly 2 feet of snow on the neighborhood. I was out shoveling my driveway when the mail carrier, bless that woman, she delivers in anything, handed me an envelope with the HOA letterhead on it. I opened it standing right there in the cold, snow still coming down light and steady around me. Dear homeowner, it read, it has been documented that on the morning of date, you operated a propane combustion device in your backyard during an active blizzard watch issued by the National Weather Service, in direct violation of HOA Community Safety Guidelines, Section 14, Subsection C, regarding open-air combustion during severe weather events. This constitutes a Level 2 safety violation. You are hereby fined $250, payable within 14 days. Failure to comply will result in additional penalties and possible lien placement on your property. Sheila Bishop, HOA President. I stood there in my driveway reading that thing twice, snow collecting on my shoulders, and I started laughing. Not because it was funny, it wasn't, not really, but because it was so absurd I didn't know what else to do. A lien, on my house, over a brisket. I went inside, shook the snow off, and pulled out my copy of the HOA bylaws, the actual official document that every homeowner in Maple Ridge Estates is supposed to receive when they buy their house. I flipped to Section 14. Subsection C did exist. It said, and I'm quoting this from memory because I read it about 11 times that afternoon, open fires, including but not limited to bonfires, brush burning, and unenclosed flame sources, are prohibited within 20 feet of any structure during active fire weather warnings issued by local authorities. Fire weather warnings, not blizzard watches. The entire subsection was about wildfire risk during dry, windy conditions, the kind of thing that matters in July, not during a snowstorm in January. There was nothing, anywhere in that document about propane smokers, grills, or any combustion appliance being banned during winter weather events. If anything, Section 14 was clearly written for a completely different season and a completely different kind of emergency. Sheila Bishop had either completely misread her own HOA's bylaws, or, and this was the theory I was leaning toward the more I thought about it, she just made something up because she didn't like the sight of smoke coming from my yard and figured nobody would bother to check. I wasn't about to just pay $250 and let that slide. Not because of the money, though $250 is $250, but because if she got away with this, next winter it'd be something else. Snow blower running too early, Christmas lights too bright, who knows? So I did what any reasonable person would do. I started building a case. First thing I did was pull the footage from my own security cameras. I've got 2 of them covering my backyard, mounted under the eaves, motion activated, recording in loop, but backed up to a cloud service because I'm paranoid like that after somebody stole my Amazon packages 2 Christmases ago. I found the footage from that morning easy enough. There it was, my smoker, sitting calm and steady on its concrete pad, smoke rising in a thin, controlled stream, snow falling all around it, nothing remotely resembling an open fire. You could see the metal awning overhead too, clear as day, catching some of the falling snow and keeping it off the unit. Then I found the footage of Sheila herself, standing at the end of my driveway with her phone out, timestamp 7:42 a.m., clear as anything. Next, I called the National Weather Service's public information line, because I wanted to nail down exactly what a blizzard watch means officially, since Sheila's letter had cited it directly as the basis for the violation. Turns out a blizzard watch is purely about wind and visibility and snowfall. It has absolutely nothing to do with fire risk or combustion restrictions. There's no overlap at all between blizzard watches and fire weather warnings. They're not even administered by the same criteria. Then I called my cousin Pete, who's a real estate attorney, not an HOA specialist exactly, but close enough that he knew his way around governing documents and could tell me, in about 4 minutes, that citing the wrong subsection to levy a fine, especially one that could result in a lien, was the kind of thing that could get an HOA board in serious trouble if a homeowner pushed back with actual documentation. "Dennis," he said over the phone, half laughing, "she fined you for violating a wildfire rule during a snowstorm. That's the short version, yeah. Please tell me you have this in writing. I have the notice, the bylaws, security footage of her taking pictures of my smoker, and I'm about to have a very strongly worded appeal letter. Send me everything," he said. "This is either the dumbest thing I've heard all year or she's trying to pull something. Either way, don't pay that fine." I wasn't planning to. Now, before I go further, I should explain a little bit about how the Maple Ridge HOA works, because it matters for what happens later. We've got a 5-person board. Sheila as president, a treasurer named Gary who mostly just nods along with whatever Sheila says, a secretary named Pam who's sweet but useless, and 2 other members, Roger and Denise, who I'd never had much contact with. Fines and violations get sent out by whichever board member handles compliance, which had somehow, over the years, become entirely Sheila's personal fiefdom. Nobody double-checked her citations. Nobody double-checked her math on the dues either, as it turned out, but that's a story for later. The appeals process, according to the bylaws, required a written appeal within 30 days, after which the board would review it at the next scheduled meeting and vote on whether to uphold or dismiss the fine. Simple enough. I wrote my appeal that same night, laying out, point by point, why the fine was invalid. Wrong subsection cited, blizzard watch not equivalent to fire weather warning, smoker was enclosed and on a concrete pad well within any reasonable safety distance, and I attached printouts of the actual bylaw language along with the NWS definitions. I mailed it certified, so there'd be no "we never received it" nonsense, and I kept a copy for myself, obviously. Then I waited. While I waited, life in Maple Ridge Estates during that blizzard kept right on being complicated in the normal ways blizzards make life complicated. The plow crews, the HOA contracts for road clearing, were doing their usual half-decent job, meaning main roads were fine, but the little side streets and cul-de-sacs like mine were a mess of packed snow and ice for days. I spent a solid 2 hours on my own driveway with a shovel and a bag of ice melt, because apparently that was a lower priority for the plow trucks than making sure the clubhouse parking lot was spotless, which, coincidentally, is right next to Sheila's house. I noticed that detail because my neighbor Frank pointed it out to me while we were both out shoveling. Frank's in his 60s, retired contractor, lives 2 houses down, and has about as much patience for Sheila as I do, which is to say very little. "You believe this?" he said, nodding toward the clubhouse lot, which had been plowed and salted like it was hosting a wedding, while our whole street looked like a glacier. "Her driveway's clear too. Funny how that works out." "She fined me for my smoker," I told him, and watched his face go through about 4 stages of disbelief before landing on pure delight. "The propane one, the one you cook the ribs on. That one." Said it violated some fire rule during the blizzard watch. Frank laughed so hard he had to lean on his shovel. "That woman's lost her whole mind. You fighting it. Already sent my appeal." "Good. You need anything, you let me know. I got half a mind to bring my own grill out just to see what she does." That conversation right there, completely unplanned, turned out to be more important than I realized at the time. Because Frank mentioning it to a few other neighbors while they were out shoveling snow is exactly how word started to spread that Sheila Bishop was writing people up for using appliances during a snowstorm. And once word starts spreading in a neighborhood like ours, especially during a week when everybody's stuck inside with nothing to do but complain to each other on the community Facebook group, it spreads fast. By the end of that week, the Maple Ridge Estates Facebook group, which I mostly used for finding out when the pool was opening or asking if anyone's dog had gotten loose again, had turned into a small war zone. Somebody named Trisha Delgado, who lived over on Birchwood Court, posted, "Anyone else get a notice for running their generator during the blizzard watch? Got fined $150 for unsafe combustion equipment operation. We lost power for 6 hours and needed heat for our baby." Then a guy named Marcus posted that he'd gotten fined for his fire pit, which he swore he hadn't even used that week, but which Sheila had apparently photographed from the street and assumed was in use based on residual heat signatures, whatever that meant. Then somebody else mentioned getting a notice about their space heater being visible through a window, cited under the same vague combustion appliance safety language. It became pretty clear pretty fast that I wasn't the only target. Sheila had apparently decided that the blizzard watch was some kind of open season for handing out fines to anybody using any kind of heat-producing device, regardless of whether it made any actual sense, and regardless of whether people needed those devices to stay warm and safe during an actual weather emergency. That last part is what really got under my skin. Because during a blizzard, when the power's flickering and temperatures are dropping into the single digits, people rely on generators, space heaters, and yes, smokers and grills to keep food from spoiling and to have some backup heat source. Fining people for using safety equipment during a safety emergency isn't just petty, it's actively working against the whole point of emergency preparedness. I started commenting on these posts, sharing my own story, and encouraging people to pull whatever documentation they had, photos, receipts, security footage, anything, and to file appeals just like I had. I also mentioned, gently, that some of these fines seemed to be citing bylaw sections that didn't actually apply, and that people should read the actual language carefully before assuming the HOA was right just because they said so. That post got over 40 comments in about 6 hours. Naturally, this did not go unnoticed by Sheila Bishop. 2 days after my Facebook comments started gaining traction, I got a call from Pam, the HOA secretary, sounding nervous in that way people sound when they've been asked to do something they don't really want to do. "Dennis, hi, it's Pam from the board. Sheila asked me to let you know that." Well, she says spreading misinformation about HOA policy on social media could be considered a violation of the community conduct guidelines, and she wanted me to give you a warning before it, escalates. I had to sit down for that one, honestly, because the sheer audacity of it took the wind out of me for a second. "Pam, I posted the actual text of the bylaw. That's not misinformation. That's the HOA's own document." "I know, she asked me to call. I'm not saying I agree with her." Pam's voice dropped lower like she was worried about being overheard. "Honestly, Dennis, a few of us on the board aren't thrilled with how she's been handling all this. Gary's been getting calls too. People are pretty upset." That was the first crack of daylight I saw into what was actually going on inside the board, and it told me 2 things. 1, Sheila didn't have as much support from the rest of the board as she liked to pretend, and 2, this whole mess was bigger than just me and my brisket. This was becoming a full-blown community uprising, and Sheila's response to that uprising was, predictably, to try to threaten people into silence. I thanked Pam for the heads up, hung up, and immediately started organizing. I want to pause here and explain something about myself, because it's relevant. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not any kind of professional community organizer. I'm just a guy who works in IT support for a regional insurance company and likes to smoke meat on weekends. But I do know how to research things, and I do know how to stay calm and methodical when somebody's trying to bully me. Because honestly, dealing with angry customers on tech support calls for 12 years teaches you a lot about staying composed while someone yells at you over something that isn't your fault. So instead of getting into a shouting match with Sheila or posting angry rants online, I decided to build the case, quietly and thoroughly, the same way I'd build a case for any IT ticket. Document everything, gather evidence, identify the root cause, and present a clear, undeniable resolution. Step 1 was reaching out to everyone in the Facebook group who'd mentioned getting a fine during the blizzard watch. I put together a simple shared document, nothing official, just a Google sheet, where people could list their name, address, date of the notice, what device they were fined for, and the specific bylaw section cited. Within 3 days, I had 11 entries. 11 households, all fined during the same 72-hour window, all cited under some version of the same vague combustion language. And this was the interesting part. Every single citation referenced Section 14, the wildfire section that had nothing to do with winter weather at all. Sheila had apparently found one bylaw with the word combustion in it, and decided it was flexible enough to apply to literally anything that produced heat, regardless of season, context, or common sense. Step 2 was pulling public information on blizzard watches versus fire weather warnings, which I already had from my earlier call to the National Weather Service, and formatting it into something clean and easy to understand. Basically a one-page comparison showing that these are two entirely separate types of weather advisories issued for entirely separate reasons, with zero overlap in the conditions that trigger them. Step 3, and this is where things got a little more serious, was figuring out whether there was a pattern to who got fined and who didn't. Because here's the thing about that Facebook group data, every single person on my list lived on one of 3 streets: Birchwood Court, Elm Hollow Lane, and my own street, Chestnut Ridge Court. Nobody on Sheila's own street, Willow Bend Drive, had reported getting a single fine. I mentioned this pattern to Frank one evening, while we were both out clearing ice off our front walks, using one of those little chemical melt bags that never seem to work as well as they claim. "Course nobody on Willow Bend got fined," Frank said, not even looking up from his work. "That's where all the board members live. Sheila, Gary, Pam too, I think. Denise lives over there as well." That stopped me cold. Wait, seriously, the whole board lives on one street. Developer built those first back when the neighborhood went up. Bigger lots, nicer views. Half the original HOA board bought in over there and just never left the board, I guess. Nobody else wants to volunteer for it, so they keep re-electing themselves basically unopposed every year. That explained a lot. It explained why enforcement always seemed to flow one direction away from Willow Bend Drive and toward everybody else. And it explained why nobody had really challenged Sheila's authority in any serious way before. When the people writing the rules, enforcing the rules, and living exempt from the consequences of the rules are all the same 5 people on the same street, you don't get accountability. You get exactly what we had: a fiefdom. I added that pattern to my growing file, though I was careful about how I framed it, because the board only fines non-board members is a strong claim, and I wanted actual numbers, not just a hunch from Frank. So I went back through the Facebook group, through neighborhood chatter, even knocked on a couple doors on Birchwood and Elm Hollow to ask people directly if they'd gotten fined, and if they knew anyone on Willow Bend who had. The answer, every single time, was no. Not one single fine had gone to a Willow Bend address in over a year, based on everything I could gather, despite Willow Bend having just as many grills, fire pits, and outdoor heating setups as anywhere else in the neighborhood. I'd seen them myself driving past. By the time the board meeting rolled around, 3 weeks after that fateful morning with my brisket, I had a folder. A real physical folder, plus a digital backup containing my original notice, the actual bylaw text with the wildfire language highlighted, the NWS definitions of blizzard watches versus fire weather warnings, my security camera footage of both my smoker and Sheila's little photo session, the shared spreadsheet of 11 households fined during the same window, and a map I'd made genuinely, an actual map, using a free tool online showing every fined address and every board member's address, color-coded so the pattern jumped right off the page. I was ready. more ready than I think Sheila expected anyone in Maple Ridge Estates to ever be. The HOA board meetings were held in the community clubhouse, a squat brick building with fluorescent lighting and folding chairs that always smelled faintly like chlorine from the pool area next door. Normally, these meetings drew maybe 6 or 7 people, mostly the same handful of retirees who liked to complain about landscaping budgets. This meeting, word had clearly gotten around, because when I pulled into the parking lot that Thursday evening, it was already nearly full, and there was a line of cars parked along the street, engines still cooling, snow crusted on their wheel wells from the plowed but not really clear roads. Inside, it was standing room only. I counted at least 40 people crammed into a room built for maybe 25 comfortably, and I recognized most of them from the Facebook group, Trisha Delgado with her husband, holding what looked like a diaper bag and a folder of her own, Marcus from the fire pit fiasco, several others whose names I'd only known as usernames until that night. Sheila sat at the head table with Gary, Pam, Denise, and Roger, and I watched her face when she scanned the crowd and realized just how many people had shown up. For just a second, before she smoothed it over with her usual composed HOA president expression, I saw something flicker across her face that looked a whole lot like panic. The meeting started with the usual boring stuff: approval of previous minutes, a landscaping budget update, a brief and clearly uncomfortable mention of increased snow removal costs this season, before Sheila tried to move things along to closing remarks, clearly hoping to avoid the elephant in the room. That's when Trisha Delgado stood up, holding her folder, and said, "Sheila, I think a lot of us are here about the fines. The ones for the blizzard watch." You could feel the whole room lean forward. Sheila's composure held for about 4 more seconds. "Trisha, if you have a concern about a specific violation, the proper channel is a written appeal, which the board will review." "I sent one 2 weeks ago," Trisha said. "So did about 6 other people in this room. Nobody's heard anything back." That got murmurs of agreement rippling through the crowd, and I decided this was my moment. I stood up, folder in hand. "Sheila, I'm Dennis Ellis, Chestnut Ridge Court. I also sent an appeal 3 weeks ago, certified mail, about the fine I got for running my propane smoker during the blizzard watch. I'd like to present some information to the board, if that's all right, since it seems like there's a pattern here worth looking at." Sheila's eyes narrowed, that particular narrowing I'd come to know well over 6 years of small skirmishes with this woman. "Dennis, this isn't really the format for a presentation, with respect," I said, keeping my voice calm. "The bylaws state that appeals get reviewed at the next scheduled board meeting following submission. This is that meeting. I think the community deserves to actually see what's being reviewed." Gary, the treasurer, who up until this point had been staring at his coffee cup like it held the secrets of the universe, cleared his throat. "I think that's reasonable, actually. Let's hear him out." Sheila shot Gary a look that could have melted the snow off every roof in Maple Ridge, but she couldn't exactly say no in front of 40 witnesses without looking like exactly what she was. "Fine." Briefly, I walked up, laid my folder on the table, and pulled out the first page, the actual bylaw text. "This is Section 14, subsection C, word for word, from the official HOA bylaws every homeowner received at closing. It prohibits open fires within 20 feet of a structure during active fire weather warnings. Fire weather warnings are issued for dry, windy, high wildfire risk conditions, typically summer, sometimes fall. They have nothing to do with snowstorms." I pulled out the next page. "This is the National Weather Service's official definition of a blizzard watch: sustained wind, low visibility, heavy snow. It's a completely different type of advisory, issued for completely different conditions. There is zero overlap between these two things. My notice cited this bylaw section for using a propane smoker, a sealed, enclosed appliance, not an open fire during a blizzard watch, which is not a fire weather warning." A few people in the crowd were already nodding, and I could hear somebody mutter, "That's what I've been saying." I kept going, pulling out my security footage stills, the smoker on its concrete pad, the metal awning, the falling snow. And then, without any dramatics, the still image of Sheila herself at the end of my driveway, phone raised, timestamp visible in the corner. This is from my own security camera, timestamped 7:42 a.m. on the morning of the blizzard watch. That's Sheila, on my property line, photographing my smoker before any notice was even issued. I want to be clear, I'm not accusing anyone of anything illegal here, but I think it's fair to ask how a violation gets documented and cited under the wrong section of our own bylaws, and whether that happened by mistake or on purpose. The room had gone very quiet, the good kind of quiet, the kind where everyone's leaning in. Then I pulled out the spreadsheet, printed nice and clean, 11 rows of names, addresses, and citations. This is every household I could find, through our community Facebook group and just talking to neighbors, that received a similar fine during the same 72-hour window. Every one of them cites this same wildfire subsection for things like generators, space heaters, fire pits, and smokers. And this? I pulled out my color-coded map, held it up so the room could see it, shows where all 11 of those addresses are located, compared to where the current HOA board members live. I didn't even have to say the rest out loud. The map spoke for itself. Every single find address was clustered on Chestnut Ridge, Birchwood, and Elm Hollow. Willow Bend Drive, where every single board member lived, was completely clean. The murmurs turned into actual noise at that point, people turning to each other, a couple of raised voices asking Sheila directly to explain the pattern. Sheila's face had gone a shade of red I can only describe as caught. She tried to regain control, raising her hand for quiet. This is Dennis. This is a very selective presentation of information, and frankly, accusing the board of some kind of targeted enforcement scheme is a serious allegation. I'm not making an allegation, I said. I'm showing documented facts. If I'm wrong about the pattern, I'm happy to be corrected. Is there a Willow Bend Drive resident here tonight who did receive a fine during the blizzard watch that I just don't know about? Silence. Nobody raised a hand. Sheila's own silence was louder than anything she could have said. That's when Denise, one of the board members who'd barely said 2 words all night, actually spoke up. Sheila, I want to see the citation log. The actual list of every notice sent out this winter. Not just what people brought tonight, all of it. Denise, that's not really necessary right now. We can discuss board procedures in a closed session. I think it is necessary, Denise said, and I could tell this was a woman who'd been sitting on some frustration of her own for a while. Because if what these people are showing us is accurate, we have a serious problem, and if it's not accurate, then let's just prove that right now by pulling the actual records. Gary nodded along with her, and even Roger, who I don't think I'd ever heard speak at any meeting ever, mumbled something in agreement. Sheila didn't have much choice at that point. She pulled out her laptop, the HOA management software they used for tracking violations, dues, and notices, and with visibly shaking hands, pulled up the citation log for the winter season. Pam, sitting next to her, leaned over to look at the screen, and I watched her face change too. Sheila, Pam said quietly, but not quietly enough that the front few rows didn't hear it. There's 18 citations here for this same violation code. Not 11, 18. That doesn't mean anything, Sheila snapped, a little too fast. It means, Denise said, leaning over to look at the screen herself, that every one of these 18 citations was issued by you personally, under your login, and none of them, not one, was ever forwarded to the rest of the board for review, which is what's supposed to happen with any fine over $100, according to our own procedures. The room had gone from murmuring to a low, steady rumble by that point. I stayed quiet, because honestly, at this point the board was doing my work for me, and I've learned in 12 years of IT support that sometimes the best thing you can do once you've handed someone the evidence is just let them trip over their own explanation. I was following procedure as I understood it, Sheila said, but her voice had lost its usual iron edge. The safety of this community is my top priority, and severe weather situations require decisive action. Decisive action would be sending out an actual weather safety advisory to residents. A voice called from the crowd. I think it was Marcus, the fire pit guy, not fining people $250 for using their smokers while their power's about to go out. That got a round of applause, actual applause from at least half the room. Gary cleared his throat again, looking distinctly uncomfortable, but also like a man who'd finally decided he'd rather deal with an awkward meeting than an angry mob of 40 homeowners. I move that the board suspend all citations issued under this violation code for the current winter season, pending a full review of the underlying bylaw language and how it was applied. Second, said Denise, immediately. Roger mumbled something that sounded enough like agreement that it counted. Sheila looked around the table, saw she was outvoted 3-1 before she'd even gotten a chance to object, and I watched something settle in her expression, not quite defeat, but the recognition that she'd badly miscalculated how far she could push this before somebody actually checked her work. Fine, she said, tight-lipped. Motion passed. The room erupted into applause again, and for a second I actually felt a little bad for her, sitting up there getting outvoted by her own board in front of half the neighborhood. That feeling lasted about 4 seconds, right up until I remembered the $250 fine sitting on my account, the 18 other households who'd gotten similarly bogus notices, and 6 years of ridiculous citations over mailbox posts and Halloween pumpkins. The meeting didn't end there, though. Once that dam broke, more people started speaking up about other issues. The uneven snow plowing that always seemed to favor Willow Bend Drive, dues increases that never quite matched what the community actually saw in improvements, a suspicious pattern of landscaping contracts that always seemed to go to the same company, which someone mentioned was owned by Sheila's brother-in-law. I hadn't planned on opening up that whole can of worms, but once people saw that pushing back actually worked, they weren't shy about bringing up everything else that had been bothering them for years. Denise, to her credit, ended up being the person who took charge of damage control that night, promising a full independent audit of the HOA's finances and violation records to be conducted by an outside accountant, with results presented at a special meeting within 60 days. She also announced, right there on the spot, that she'd be filing paperwork to run for board president in the next election, which prompted another round of applause, this one even louder than before. Sheila sat through all of it with her jaw tight, occasionally trying to interject with something about due process or the complexity of community management, but nobody in that room was interested in hearing it anymore. The spell, whatever spell had kept people quiet and compliant for years, was broken. I got my $250 fine reversed that same night, along with every other resident who'd been hit during the blizzard watch. All 18 of us, total $3,600 in bogus fines, refunded in full within the week, per the board's emergency vote. But that wasn't actually the end of it, because about 10 days after that meeting, the independent audit Denise had promised turned up something a lot more serious than a misapplied bylaw section. I got a call from Frank one evening, sounding almost giddy, which for Frank is a pretty rare state. "You hear about the audit yet?" "No, what happened?" "Landscaping contract. The one that's been going to Green Horizons Lawn and Snow for the last 4 years. Turns out that company's owned by Sheila's brother-in-law, just like people were saying, but that's not even the worst part. The audit found the HOA's been paying them almost double market rate for snow removal services, like, actually double, and get this, invoices for plowing services on days when there wasn't even any snow." "You're kidding." "Nope. Auditor found 6 invoices over the last 2 years for snow removal on days with 0 recorded snowfall according to weather records. 6. Paid in full, no questions asked, Because guess who approved every single invoice personally instead of sending it through the normal board review? I didn't even have to guess. Once that got out, and it got out fast, because Denise made sure a summary of the audit findings went out to every single household in the neighborhood via email and physical mailer, things moved quickly. The board called an emergency session, minus Sheila this time, since by that point 3 of the 5 board members had lost all patience with her. They voted to terminate the landscaping contract with Green Horizons immediately, open it up for competitive bidding, and refer the fraudulent invoice findings to the county, since misappropriating HOA funds collected from residents as mandatory dues isn't just a bylaw violation, it's actual fraud and potentially theft, depending on how the county wanted to handle it. That's when things stopped being a funny neighborhood story and became something with actual legal weight. A detective from the county sheriff's office ended up getting involved, because once you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars in falsified invoices funneled to a family member's company, that crosses out of petty HOA drama territory and into honest-to-goodness financial fraud. The detective interviewed several board members, including Gary and Denise, who cooperated fully and handed over everything from the audit, along with the original citation logs that showed Sheila's pattern of unilaterally issuing fines without board oversight, which, while not itself the main crime, helped paint a pretty clear picture of a woman who'd gotten very comfortable operating without any accountability at all. Sheila, for her part, tried to claim the invoice issue was a simple misunderstanding, that she'd trusted her brother-in-law's company to bill accurately and hadn't personally reviewed every invoice, which might have been believable if not for the fact that her own signature approved every single one of those payments, including the ones for phantom snow removal on clear, sunny days. It took a couple months for the investigation to fully play out, but eventually the county did file charges, theft by deception and misappropriation of funds, given the scale of the discrepancy, which the audit eventually pegged at just over $47,000 over 2 years once they dug through everything. Sheila was arrested at her own home on Willow Bend Drive, which I did not witness personally but which Frank absolutely did, because Frank apparently makes a habit of walking his dog past that particular house at exactly the right time, and he described it to me in more detail than I probably needed, including the part where she asked the deputies if she could at least grab her HOA vest before they put her in the car. They said no. She was released on bail within a day. Obviously, this wasn't some massive violent crime, but the case moved forward, and eventually she took a plea deal restitution of the full misappropriated amount, a few years of probation, and permanent removal from any HOA board position, countywide, which I found out is actually a real thing that can happen. Apparently, there's some clause about financial crimes involving community association, funds that bars you from serving on any HOA board in the state afterward. Small mercy, but a real one. Her brother-in-law's landscaping company got hit with its own separate fraud charges for the falsified invoices, and last I heard, that whole business folded within a year, which, I won't pretend I felt bad about it, considering how much of our dues money had gone towards 6 years of double-priced lawn care and fake snow removal. As for Maple Ridge Estates, the neighborhood actually came out of the whole mess stronger than it had been in years. Denise ran for board president in the special election that followed and won by a landslide. No surprise there. One of her first actions was completely rewriting the compliance and citation process, so no single board member could ever issue a fine unilaterally again. Every violation notice now requires review and sign-off from at least 2 board members before it goes out, and there's a mandatory annual review of every bylaw section to make sure the language actually makes sense and gets applied correctly. She also set up a proper appeals committee made up of volunteer residents, not board members, specifically so there'd never again be a situation where the person writing the citation was also the person deciding whether the citation was valid. And it may be my favorite outcome of the whole thing. The new board formally amended Section 14 to clarify, in plain language, that combustion appliances used for cooking grills, smokers, that sort of thing are permitted year-round as long as they're used safely and at a reasonable distance from structures, regardless of weather advisories, with a specific note that emergency heating and cooking equipment used during power outages or severe weather is explicitly protected, not punished. Denise told me, half joking, that they should just call it the brisket clause, and honestly I wouldn't mind if that name stuck. The following winter, almost exactly a year after that whole blizzard watch fiasco, another big storm rolled through, not quite as severe, but enough to knock out power for a good chunk of the neighborhood for about 5 hours. I fired up my propane smoker that morning, same spot, same concrete pad, same little metal awning, cooking up a pork shoulder this time instead of brisket, and nobody came knocking on my door with a camera and an attitude. Instead, Frank wandered over around noon, once he smelled it from 2 houses down, and asked if I had enough to share. I told him to grab a plate and bring a couple chairs, and we ended up sitting out under that awning, snow falling steady around us, eating smoked pork and watching the neighborhood quietly go about its business. Actual snow plows clearing every street evenly this time, no favoritism toward any particular address, no threatening letters taped to anyone's door. Denise stopped by too, on her way back from checking on an elderly resident down the street who'd lost power, and I offered her a plate as well. She laughed when she saw the smoker going. "You know," she said, taking a bite, "I still can't believe this whole thing started because of a brisket." "Started because of a brisket," I said. "Ended with a fraud conviction and $47,000 in restitution. Not bad for a Tuesday morning cookout." "The brisket clause," Frank said, raising his paper plate like it was a toast, "to the most important amendment in Maple Ridge history." We all laughed, and for the first time in a long while, sitting there in the snow with good food and neighbors who actually looked out for each other instead of spying on each other with their phones out, Maple Ridge Estates finally felt like the kind of community it was supposed to be all along. Sheila Bishop, last I heard, had moved out of the neighborhood entirely, sold the house on Willow Bend Drive at a bit of a loss given the circumstances, and nobody's seen much of her since. I can't say I miss the ruler-measured grass inspections or the citations over Halloween decorations, and I definitely don't miss getting fined for keeping my dinner warm during a snowstorm. But I'll tell you what I do keep, tucked away in a drawer in my office, right next to my smoker's warranty paperwork. A printed copy of that original notice, the one accusing me of an open burning violation for a sealed propane smoker during a blizzard watch. I keep it as a reminder that sometimes the most ridiculous fights are the ones most worth having, especially when you've got the receipts, the security footage, and 18 neighbors just as fed up as you are. And every winter since, when the first real snowstorm rolls through, I fire up that smoker without a second thought, smoke curling up steady into the cold air, snow falling all around it, exactly the way it's supposed to. Nobody's ever complained about it since.